Okay, so moving along to our next submission. So Karen sent us a photograph, and it turned out that this photograph was much more interesting than we thought it would be. And it's a really interesting case study about how much information you can extract from one seemingly not very informative item. It's not like a birth record or anything like that. It's just a photo. So that's the photo. And the question that Karen first had is one of the so she and I like the way you think, Karen. So she's in your question you said that it looks like a military uniform, but there was sort of a hesitation there, like, is this really a military uniform? And that's important. So let me show you why that's important. So here is some guys in uniforms that look vaguely like the uniform in your photo, but they are not soldiers. In fact, if we zoom out, because that was just a zoomed in part of a much larger photo. If you've been to our website, you might actually recognize this photo. It's on our homepage. We can see that these guys are probably not soldiers. I mean, after all, there are Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts here. There's a priest and a bishop. They're almost certainly standing in front of a church. And there's stars and stripes there right above the bishop's head. This is obviously taken in the United States. Turns out this was taken in the mid-20s. And it was, these guys were actually not soldiers. They were actually members of a group of a sort of a social organization called the Sich, which basically they were kind of into athletics. Some of them did volunteer firefighting, and they also like to dress up in uniforms and march around in drill formation and stuff like that. However, this photo, so to really identify what this uniform is really tricky. You really need to be an expert. Because it all comes down to really, really tiny details of like the belt, the collar, the sleeves, the pockets, all that stuff. We, unfortunately, at the UHEC do not have that expertise. None of our Nashi Predky team has that level of expertise. However, we know people. So what we did is I emailed a photo, a copy, the digital photo that you sent me, to a few people in Ukraine, and one of them got back to me almost right away. His name is Pavlo Podobed. He is a young historian. He's younger than me, but his area of expertise is early 20th century Ukrainian military history. That's his thing, from like World War I through the end of the Revolutionary period. That's all he does. He thinks, lives, and breathes that time period. And he got back to me very quickly with the following information. Yes, it is a military uniform. It is, in fact, an Austro-Hungarian army uniform. It is not a Sich rifleman uniform. It is not, as you perhaps suspected, a Ukrainian Galician army uniform. It is definitely Austro-Hungarian. How exactly he determined that, I'm really not sure. If you need those details, I can get back to him and he can provide the details. But he is quite certain. Furthermore, this is the uniform of a primate of like an ordinary private, or what in German was called an Unteroffizier, which would be roughly in English a non-commissioned officer. So basically, he was either a private or, like in English terminology, a corporal, or at most a sergeant. If he was any higher in rank than that, he would not be an Unteroffizier. He would have a different, his uniform would be different. Furthermore, he's quite certain that this photo was taken in the 1914 to 1916 timeframe, so in the early years of World War I. And so one of the things, and this is sort of the details that only an expert would notice, he thinks that that thing in his left arm over here is actually the stock of a Mannlicher rifle, which would have been the standard issue rifle for a Austro-Hungarian low-ranking soldier. So that's kind of interesting. Going to the back of the photo, and incidentally, I did not send him the back of the photo. So all I sent him was this image and the name of the village that is associated with your family. Oh, and just to point out, there were Ukrainian units in the Austrian army. I mean, here's a postcard from one of our archives collections, from the Krochmalny postcard album. And you can see, and again, here it's hard to tell because it's an added complication. Most of them are wearing overcoats. So you actually can't see the details of the uniform underneath. But so I'm not going to go into all the gory details of the history of this time period, but basically the part of Ukraine that was under Austria-Hungary remained with Austria-Hungary until 1918, when it was finally clear that they were heading for military defeat, so they created this thing called the West Ukrainian People's Republic. They joined the Ukrainian People's Republic, which had been the part that had been part of the Russian Empire. For a brief time, there was a unified Ukraine, and then things got really complicated and ugly, and as you may know, things did not end well, at least from the Ukrainian point of view. So this photo here would have been taken before any of that happened. So the back of the photo. This was initially very hard to read, but actually our director, Natalia Honcharenko, kind of took one look at it and was able to read it almost instantly. And I agree with her reading, and I think the rest of our team agrees with it. This is what it says. The top part of it is in Ukrainian. Yasko Krasilovich, я твій брат Микола Krasilovich, поздоровляю ті, а був здоров і щасливий. So if you don't know Ukrainian, here's the rough translation. So Yasko is a diminutive of the name Yakiv, which is equivalent to the English Jacob or James. Krasilovich. I, your brother Mikola Krasilovich, Mikola being Nicholas, greet you and wish you health and fortune. And then the lower part, I think is in English. It looks like it says 118 East 3rd Street, first floor front, and then 11-14. Now this 11-14 is not clear. It might be a month or a year, and we'll come back to that because we have actually found additional information. So based on that, it looks like this is your great uncle, I believe, right? I think I got the right generation there. So this would be Mikola. Because of the way that it's phrased, he's saying that I, your brother Mikola, and presumably he's sending this photo. That's what I'm supposing here. However, we have Justin Hauser on our team when we were preparing for tonight, just on a whim, did some searching, and I'll go ahead and let him tell you what he found.
All right. So you mentioned about, before I get to this, you mentioned about Yatsko or Yakiv. I did find and I didn't include this in what I'm going to show, but I did find a Jacob Krasilovich getting married in the Manhattan Marriage Index in 1916. So it makes sense that Yakiv, Yatsko is the one in America, and Mikola or Nicholas is the one who was back in Austria-Hungary serving in the military. So what we did from there was there's a resource out there for those of you whose ancestors may have served in the Austro-Hungarian military during World War I. It appears on various websites, but on a regular basis during the course of the war, the Austrian government published regular casualty lists called the Wehrlostliste, which were basically regular updates on the identities of soldiers who had been wounded, captured, killed, or otherwise died in the service. And these were published on a fairly regular basis and circulated among the provinces because a lot of people obviously wanted to know what was going on with soldiers from their family or from their town. Fortunately, those Wehrlostliste are available online and relatively easily searchable on a number of websites, one being the Austrian, I believe, National Library, and another, the Czech Archives has them. If you Google around, you find several different copies of them. So knowing that there might have been an ancestor, this Mikola Krasilovich, who served in the Austro-Hungarian army, it seemed possible to me that he might have been wounded or captured or killed. And so I searched for the surname in the Verlust. And I think the next slide has what we found. So in the list that was published on the 27th of October 1914, so only about 5 months into the war, less than that really, from that website there, which is the Austrian National Archive, there is a Nikolaus Krasilovich, which would be the Polonized Germanic form. Not surprising at all. Those of us who do research on Ukrainians from Austria-Hungary get used to the fact that our ancestors' names were often translated into Polish or German or Latin, depending upon the record. So it's not surprising that a Mikola Krasilovich would be listed as a Nikolaus Krasilovich. He's listed as a corporal, which fits the identity of the soldier in the photograph that you have. From the abbreviation there, KK, which would be the Imperial and Royal I think it's Landwehr Infanterie Regiment, so it would have been an infantry regiment, number 19, the 9th Company of the 19th Infantry Regiment. And unfortunately, it says that he taught, which means that he died. It doesn't give any more detail than that. We can't be 100% sure from this list whether this man is actually the Mikola Krasilovich that we're looking for, because unfortunately in this particular list, unlike some others, it does not list his birth year or town of origin. Some lists actually give that. But given what we know and what we found so far, there's a very distinct possibility that this entry in the casualty list may well be for the same man who shows up in the photograph that you have. There's a further step that you might be able to take to try to confirm this, and that is that Austrian military regiments had their own chaplains and they kept their own metrical registers, which are records of mostly marriages and deaths, but occasionally births that occurred connected with the regiment. For example, officers had families and they may have had children baptized in the regimental by the regimental chaplain. Family Search, which is the website of the LDS, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints collection, in fact, has the metrical book of the Austrian 19th Infantry Regiment, including deaths up to the year 1916. And the link is given there, and I presume we can send you a copy of this slide later so that you have that link. Yes, yep. It has not yet been digitized. It exists on microfilm in Salt Lake City. So what you will have to do is either go there or write there or arrange for a researcher to go there on your behalf to the Family History Library and take a look at the deaths book of the 19th Infantry Regiment for approximately the fall of 1914, because this man died maybe in the weeks or months before that casualty list was compiled. And see if he is entered in that casualty list in perhaps an age or a town of birth or something like that to help give you a little more confidence that this is your relative. But it should be possible to check that source for that information. If it is in fact him, it's very tragic and ironic, because if the date 1114 or the numbers 1114 on the photograph are a date, then perhaps this was sent very shortly before this soldier died in the service, and his good wishes may have been a very tragic post-mortem message to his brother, perhaps arriving around the same time he learned of the death. We don't know that, that's guessing, but it seems very possible based upon this information. In searching the surname Krasilovich in these records, we do see a Johann Krasilovich, and Johann being the German translation of Ivan or Jan or John, born 1897 in that same town, Lohodov, who was wounded in 1917. and I have the link for that as well. So he may have been another relative. If you look at the church records from that town, you may find that he's a brother or a cousin or something. But these knowing the name of a soldier in the Austrian army in World War I, it's very interesting to delve into these casualty lists to see if more information can be quickly learned about those who did in fact become casualties of the war.
Thank you, Justin, for looking that up. So this is a great example of how just one item, a photo with some writing on the back, can lead to a lot of information that you might not have thought of looking for.